The room, paneled in dark walnut, exuded the distinctive, time-worn scent of places where power preserved legacy. Along the walls hung large portraits of stern-faced white men in expensive suits, casting a heavy, almost oppressive atmosphere over the space. Light from the chandelier shimmered through flutes of champagne, glinting off the silk garments of those seated around the long table. Every one of them bore the Whitmore name, wealthy, arrogant, and cold, and at the threshold, standing precisely on the line between inside and out, was Layla Thompson. The 17-year-old girl wore a worn white shirt and faded jeans. She stood tall, though her palms were slick with sweat. Her natural curls were tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her expression composed, but her eyes carried the wary alertness of someone long used to being judged. Layla had no designer bag, no jewelry, no companion. Only a copy of the invitation printed on cream-colored paper, laminated simply, clutched firmly in her hand. The air in the room shifted the moment the heavy wooden door closed behind her. "Who is that?" a woman's voice asked, deliberately loud enough to be heard. It was Clarissa Whitmore, sister of Charles Whitmore, the man who had just passed away, and whose will was to be read that day. She wore an emerald green dress from a renowned designer's spring collection, her lips a deep red, her gaze sweeping over Layla as if she were a stain on the Persian rug. "Looks like the new maid. Probably lost," muttered a man with a soft chuckle. That was Gregory, the eldest grandson of the family. His voice carried a blend of curiosity and contempt. Layla said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't lower her gaze. She simply took a deep breath and walked toward the only empty chair near the lawyer's seat. Each step felt like it dragged through the gravity of 100 judging stares. In her mind, her mother's voice whispered, as it had on all those quiet mornings when they cleaned the vast Whitmore estate, "They may see you as invisible, but never see yourself as small." She sat back straight, hands clasped in her lap, no bowed head, no scanning glances. At that moment, Harold Jensen, the Whitmore family's private attorney for over 3 decades, entered through the side door. His gray suit fit neatly, thin-rimmed glasses rested on his nose, and though his face was lined with age, his eyes were sharp and clear. He scanned the room until his gaze landed on Layla. "Miss Layla Thompson," he said aloud. The room froze. Layla stood and gave a slight nod. "Pleased to meet you. Please sit beside me," Harold said, personally pulling out the chair next to the main table for her. If time could freeze, that moment would have iced the entire room. Clarissa dropped her silver spoon. Gregory choked on his drink. A distant cousin stared wide-eyed, unable to comprehend what was unfolding. "Mr. Jensen, I believe there's been some mistake," Gregory said. "This girl, who is she?" "She is a named party in the will, and a formal guest," Harold replied crisply, already opening his briefcase. Layla didn't look at anyone, but inside, old wounds scratched open again. Time she had walked behind her mother, cleaning floors, quietly dodging disdainful glances from the very people now staring at her. The day one family member poured water all over her homework because she dropped a cleaning cloth. The day her mother's pay was cut for chatting too much with the master of the house. She remembered everything, but today wasn't about the past. She came to listen, to understand why Charles Whitmore, a man who had only ever nodded at her in passing, had summoned her to this tightly controlled family gathering. "Before we proceed," Harold said clearly, "Mr. Charles left behind a video to be played prior to the reading of his will." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Some leaned forward. Others crossed their arms skeptically. Clarissa sighed and muttered, "Probably one of his old sentimental theatrics." A large screen at the end of the room flickered on. Blue light spread across the faces of everyone in the room, including Layla. Her face remained composed, but her eyes quietly widened. Charles Whitmore appeared on the screen, his frame thinner, worn down by illness, but his gaze still sharp. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I've left this world, and I'm sure you're all wondering who's getting what." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "But before we talk about money, I have a question. Who among you knows the name of Marlene's daughter woman? Who cleaned my house for the past 20 years? Silence swallowed the room. Layla could hear her heartbeat like a slow, heavy drum. Still, she didn't look around. She stared only at Charles on the screen as if he were asking her something far deeper. A question not meant to be answered, but to reveal a truth. The silence lingered. Not just an absence of sound, but a mirror reflecting the inner landscape of every person in the room. From the screen playing Charles Whitmore's final video, a dim light cast its glow over pale, uneasy, and even angry faces. No one. Charles' voice returned, soft as a reminder, yet sharp enough to send a shiver down spines. That girl started working in this house when she was 12, cleaning the marble floors alongside her mother, scrubbing the footprints you left behind. And not a single one of you knows her name. Layla did not bow her head, but inside her chest, memories once dormant stirred with startling clarity. She remembered the first day she followed her mother to the Whitmore estate, her small hands sticky with detergent. She remembered seeing the towering library filled with thousands of books, a place she would sneak into whenever she had the chance to read. She also remembered the whispers behind her back, the cold glances, the many times she was ignored. But the one thing she would never forget was that winter afternoon day. Charles Whitmore suddenly stopped in the doorway of the library, where she sat reading To Kill a Mockingbird. "Young lady, what do you take from that book?" he asked, without greeting, without a smile. She was only 15 then, but she looked up and answered quietly, "I think some truths don't need to be proven with words. A truly just person knows when to stay silent and when to speak." Charles had looked at her for a long time, then nodded once and walked away. Only now, in his absence, did Layla fully understand that moment had been the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. Back in the room, the video continued. "I've watched you for years," Charles said. "I've seen how you treat the servers, the drivers, the people who provide you with comfort and ask for nothing but respect. And I've seen Layla, child, none of you ever truly noticed." Clarissa gripped her wine glass so tightly that her red-polished nails whitened against the stem. Gregory rolled his eyes, visibly annoyed. "This is nonsense," he muttered. But Harold, the aging attorney, looked up from his file and said calmly, "Everything will be explained. Mr. Gregory, please allow the video to finish." Layla's eyes remained fixed on the screen, but her mind was elsewhere, in her heart. That long silence was no longer a burden, it was confirmation. For the first time in her life, the truth of her quiet years was being spoken aloud by the most powerful man in the family. "Layla is not a stranger," Charles continued. "She is living proof of the virtues you've forgotten: kindness, perseverance, and courage. She declined my first offer." A stir rippled through the room. Layla noticed some gazes turning her way, no longer with contempt, but with suspicion. "I offered to leave her a portion of my estate," Charles said. "But Layla told me, 'I don't want your money. I just want a chance.' That answer made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about my life." The room went still. No more laughter, no more murmurs. Only the weight of gazes falling on the young woman sitting upright, her face calm, her eyes glowing with a light both strong and tender. As the video ended, Harold Jensen rose, holding a thick envelope sealed in red wax. "Before I read the official will, let me confirm, all documents are legally sound. Signed while Mr. Charles was of sound mind, with full medical and legal oversight." Gregory gripped the armrest. Clarissa leaned back, the arrogance fading from her eyes. "In this will, Harold reads slowly, Mr. Charles Whitmore bequeaths to Miss Layla Thompson 51% of Whitmore Holdings, the entire estate in New Haven, and a cash sum of $25 million allocated across 3 investment accounts." A sharp gasp escaped Gregory. Clarissa whispered, "Impossible." Layla showed no reaction. She had been told this weeks ago in a private meeting with Harold, but hearing it again here, in front of those who had once trampled over her, brought a surge of emotion she could barely name. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but a long-standing ache being washed clean. This is a scheme. Gregory leapt to his feet, pointing at Harold. She manipulated him when he was weak. Sit down, Harold commanded sternly. One more word and I'll have security escort you out. Layla stood, voice composed. Mr. Gregory, I didn't need to manipulate anyone. Grandfather Charles saw messanything none of you managed to do in the 10 years. I lived in your shadow. Her gaze swept across the room. I have nothing to prove, because my existence is proof enough. You don't have to like me. But today, you do have to see me. No one responded. The air in the room seemed frozen. That evening, Layla sat alone on the library steps where she used to sneak books after cleaning shifts. The night breeze was cool, and the trees whispered in the courtyard. She thought of her mother Marinan in a cancer treatment center. Unaware that her daughter now held the future of an empire, she thought of Charles, the only one in that family who had truly listened, not with ears, but with action. Layla placed her hand on the old wooden step etched by years of silent service. Once, she thought she would always be a shadow. Now, she was not a shadow anymore. The next morning, the top floor of Whitmore Holdings bathed in the soft light of late autumn. The spaces reserved exclusively for board members Snow carried a different energy, tense, cautious, and a bit uncertain. Layla stood beside the large glass window, looking down at the city. Tiny cars trailed like ants, but to her, they were people with real lives like her mother, like the custodial workers who cleaned these very hallways, whose names none of the Whitmores had ever learned. Miss Thompson. Harold Jensen's voice called from behind. We have an unexpected guest. Layla turned. Standing beside Harold was a tall, slender woman in a pale gray blazer. Her face bore the marks of experience, but her eyes held a surprising gentleness. She stepped toward Layla, hand extended. I'm Dr. Lorraine Foster. It's an honor to meet you, Layla. The handshake was warm and steady. Something in Layla softened. Not many people made her feel trust at first sight. Dr. Foster was Charles' final attending physician, Harold explained, and a key part of the decision he made. Layla tilted her head. I never saw you at his house. That's because we met at the hospital, Lorraine said, her eyes deepening. Not when Charles was sick, but when your mother, Marlene, was admitted. Layla froze. Last summer, her mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 liver cancer. Layla had paused school, taken night shifts, and even begged Gregorythan, the estate manager, for an advance to pay for medication. In return, she received only a cold stare and a cruel reply. If you can't afford treatment, maybe you should find a job that fits your status. That night, Layla cried alone on the hospital's emergency stairwell, and there Lorraine had found her. I'll never forget your eyes that night, Lorraine recalled. They weren't the eyes of a fragile girl. They were the eyes of someone holding pain, too deep for words yet still determined to stay standing. Layla felt her throat tighten. After hearing your story, I took you to Charles. I told him, there's a girl you need to meet, a young woman who holds the very qualities you're so desperate to find in your own bloodline. And he agreed, Layla asked. Lorraine nodded. The moment he met you, he knew he was right. Just then, Harold pulled a small USB from his pocket. There's one final video, he said. Charles asked it be played only if his decision was ever questioned. Layla nodded. Harold inserted the USB into the boardroom screen. Once again, blue light flickered against the heavy wood-paneled walls of Whitmore Holdings' top floor. Charles Whitmore appeared one last time. He looked frailer now, his face hollowed by illness. His eyes sunken, but the fire in his gaze remained. If you're watching this, he began, then my family is contesting my decision. They may believe I was manipulated by Layla, or worse, that I'd lost my mind. He smirked slightly, a flash of irony in his eyes. Let me be clear. I was fully lucid. I had doctor's certifications, medical records, recorded conversations, but more than all thought he had a reason. Layla didn't take anything from me, he continued, voice softening. In fact, she refused me many times. First, I offered to pay her college tuition. She said, "I'll handle it." Then, I proposed a scholarship and my Nimesh said, "You don't need your name on my journey." The last time, when I offered her a share of my estate, she paused and said, "I don't want power to get revenge. I want power to create change." Layla's nose burned with emotion. The video shifted to a series of clips pulled from hidden cameras in the estate, from Charles' private security system. One showed Gregory berating a housekeeper over spilled coffee. Another showed Clarissa tearing up a sick leave form submitted by a secretary, whose child was hospitalized. There were clips of family meetings, secretly recorded, where members used derogatory language and belittled anyone beneath their social class. Layla's face stayed calm, but inside, a storm swirled. Not because she didn't know how toxic they were, but because now, the world would see. The video ended with Charles' final words, "I leave my legacy to the one who deserves it, not the one who shares my blood. Because blood does not guarantee character, and existence does not equal worth." The screen went dark. No one in the room spoke. Clarissa lowered her head. Gregory sat frozen, eyes red. Lorraine gently laid a hand on Layla's shoulder. "You weren't chosen by luck. You were chosen for your values. And now, you have a chance to change not just a family but an entire system." Layla turned to her, smiling for the first time that morning. "I don't know where to begin," she confessed. "I'm just a kid." "You're not just a kid," Lorraine said, eyes full of faith. "You're living proof that goodness still exists. And maybe that's where real power truly begins." The atmosphere in the hall thickened after Charles Whitmore's second video played. No one dared speak in protest. Those who once sneered at Layla now sat frozen, not in acceptance but in realization. The old game had ended, and a new set of rules had just begun. Layla stood in the very room where she had once bowed her head to clean. No longer the maid's daughter, no longer a silent shadow in the world of the wealthy. She now held power. But in her heart, power didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a weight cold in her palms, heavy with responsibility. Harold Jensen turned to the final page of the file. "To ensure a transparent and effective transition process, in accordance with Mr. Charles' will, I hereby announce temporary governance of the company will be entrusted to a transitional council. This includes myself," he added, "and one other woman you're about to meet." The rear wooden doors opened. A tall, silver-haired man in a simple black suit stepped in, followed by a gray-haired woman with a sharp gaze, and 3 younger individual men and 1 woman dressed in plain white shirts. "Please welcome," Harold declared, "the Temporary Transitional Council former Whitmore Holdings employees, terminated for daring to propose reform." Clarissa scowled. "Who are these people?" Layla turned, her voice calm but firm. "They are the people your family chose to forget, but Mr. Charles didn't." The older man stepped forward. "I'm Carlos Mendez. I was head of finance for 25 years. Fired for proposing profit sharing with employees." The woman followed. "Sandra Lim, former head of HR. Let go after opposing the termination of pregnant staff." Next came Devenance, the lead systems engineer, dismissed for defending his team's wage concerns. Then Tasha, a former assistant secretary, fired by Clarissa for requesting leave to care for her sick mother. And finally, Noah Williams, a young financial analyst and former intern whom Charles had quietly mentored for his potential. Gregory squinted, sneering. "What is this you plan to run the company with? A bunch of rejects?" Layla smiled, not defiantly, but like someone with nothing left to hide. "No, I'm not running the company," she replied. "I lack the experience, and I won't take on what I'm not ready for." "Then who will?" Clarissa barked. "Those who once tried to fix the system from within," Layla said. "The ones your family discarded, despite their capabilities. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for fairness." The room trembled with the weight of her words. "This is betrayal," Gregory shouted, shoving his chair back. "Charles would never hand over the company to these failures." Harold's voice remained even. Charles didn't hand the company to anyone. He left a legacy to those with vision, and that vision he saw in Layla and those she chose. Gregory clenched his fists. "I'll sue. I'll go to court. I have rights." Layla met his glare. "You do," she said, like anyone who once had a chance and chose privilege over correction. No one noticed the young reporter from the New York Observer in the back corner, scribbling every word. A headline was about to break about the young black girl, the unexpected heir to the Whitmore empire, and the first decision that would stun an entire boardroom. That afternoon, Layla visited the hospital where her mother Marlon era under treatment. Her mother slept, her face gaunt, but more at peace than it had been in her final working years. Layla sat beside the bed and held her hand. "Mom," she whispered, "I didn't choose this. But I won't run from it either. I know I'm not perfect, but I'll do what's right." She kissed her mother's hand, as she once did as a child. Her eyes no longer brimmed with tears. They gleamed with clarity, like someone who finally saw the road ahead, no matter how treacherous it might be. That night, Layla issued her first official decision as majority shareholder. "I, Layla Thompson, hereby approve the full restitution of 27 disputed land parcels in Southside, formerly home to 213 families displaced by Whitmore Holdings since 1972. The transfer will be at no cost, accompanied by a commitment to rebuild homes using the company's Community Restoration Fund." No sooner had she signed than a wave of internal emails hit from legal, from investment, from PR. Some were furious, some remained silent, but a few messages made her smile. A janitor emailed a single line, "Thank you for seeing us." 2 days later, headlines dominated the front pages of the New York Observer, The Guardian, and Bloomberg Ethicsal, featuring her image and the headline, "The 17-year-old who awakened a sleeping empire's conscience." Online, a storm was brewing. Former residents of South Cityans cleared to build a luxury mall gathered at Whitmore Holdings HQ, with signs, "Thank you, Layla, not revenge." Restoration, on the 34th floor of the tower. Clarissa sat in her old office repurposed as the Transition Council's information center, her eyes fixed on the live news broadcast. Every chant from the crowd outside struck like a blade against the ego she had built all her life. A press statement from the new board had just been released. "We are not destroying Whitmore's legacy. We are returning it to where it belongs, the community's trust." Clarissa slammed her hand on the desk, rattling a glass of tea. Her face went pale. She had been born into wealth, groomed to be Charles' great successor, but never once had she truly listened to her. Power was a fortress. Higher the walls, the safer she felt. And now, that girl Layla with a single document had cracked the entire structure. As for Gregory, who once vowed lawsuits, demanded his inheritance, and raged about what was rightfully his, he now sat alone in a dim bar in East Brooklyn. In front of him, a letter from his attorney. "Your claim lacks legal merit. The will has been verified. Releasing video footage of your conduct, recorded by Charles Whitmore, may backfire in court." Gregory's hands tightened, then fell slack like armor slipping off a man who no longer knew how to fight. He had never imagined a day when he would be the one on the outside of power. In his mind, Layla was no longer the girl scrubbing floors. She was the composed face who had looked him dead in the eye and said, "You don't have to like me, but today, you have to see me." And it was her calmer refusal to yell, "Shame," or crush anyone that now haunted him most. Meanwhile, on the ground floor of Whitmore Holdings, Layla entered the newly renovated community response room, a space for former employees, current workers, and residents to meet with the council and offer feedback. The first person waiting was Mr. Daniel Morales, 63, who had worked 18 years maintaining the FIC systems. "You wouldn't remember," he said as he sat, "but when you were 10, you gave me a small candy after seeing me cry on the rooftop." Layla blinked. "I didn't think anyone would remember that." "I did," he nodded, "because that was the first time anyone asked me, 'Are you okay?' while I was in a technician's uniform." Layla said nothing. She just reached out and held his hand tightly. Word of Layla's decision began to spread not just in the media, but inside boardrooms of major corporations under scrutiny for ruthless land exploitation. At a modest sustainability conference in Washington, her name was invoked as a ground-up model of reform. That young woman, a Stanford professor said, didn't just do the right thing. She did it at the right time. Meanwhile, Clarissa walked into Harold Jensen's office, holding a printout from the Wall Street Herald. "I want to talk," she said, her voice, for the first time, not proud. Harold looked up. "About what?" "About joining the social reintegration program Layla proposed." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? You said you'd never." "I'm not doing it for her," Clarissa cut in. "I'm doing it for myself. Because I'm starting to realize I never knew anything at all." Layla only found out when she received a confirmation email. Clarissa had registered for the program's orientation. No promises, no grand gestures, but it was a step. Layla closed her laptop and sat quietly, staring out the large window. Rain gently fell onto the pavement below like the sigh of a city learning how to listen again. She exhaled. Her heart felt lighter. She knew real change never came from one single act. But sometimes, a girl who dared step into a room where no one believed she had the right to stand could start an earthquake. For days after Layla's reform program began rolling out, the headlines remained glowing. Some called it the fresh wind of the 21st century, but no one noticed that amid that wind, a dark cloud was silently forming. In a dimly lit cafe tucked within the city's aging financial district, Gregory Whitmore sat across from a man whose face was obscured by a baseball cap and black mask. "You're sure the internal data copies still exist?" Gregory whispered, unable to hide his urgency. The man nodded and placed a silver USB on the table. "These files," he said, "are internal cost analysis from Charles's era. There are details about questionable land deals if released at the right moment. It'll trigger a trust crisis. And if someone knows how to spin the headline." Gregory nodded. In his eyes wasn't just bitterness. It was the crumbling of an entire belief system that had once upheld him. And when someone loses all foundation, they sometimes choose to pull everyone else down with them. "She really thinks morality alone can hold up a corporation?" Gregory scoffed. "We'll show the world just how fragile her idealism really is." The next morning at 9:30 a.m., financial newspapers across the country received anonymous email slate documents included. Among them, a $2,000 for land acquisition deal between Whitmore Holdings and local government suspected of legal circumvention. The name highlighted in the documents, Charles Whitmore. The first explosive headline hit Twitter X. Company praised for ethics. Now entangled in land fraud scandal, the news spread like wildfire. Media flooded Whitmore Holdings headquarters. Questions came in rapid fire at Layla and the new transition board. "Are you covering something up? Did you know about these deals before you inherited the company? Was this Charles's way of avoiding investigation by handing it to you?" Layla stood amid the barrage of cameras, her face composed, though her gaze flickered with the weight of the moment. That evening, an emergency meeting was held in the strategy room on the 18th floor. The air was taut. Everyone had read the leaked documents. Carlos Mendes spoke first, even if it happened during Charles's tenure. "The press won't separate facts. They'll go after Layla's the symbol now." Sandra Lim interjected, "We need to respond immediately. If we delay, the media will define the truth before we can." Layla remained silent, her hands clasped on the table. She listened, letting the room spill its fears and thoughts. Then everyone turned to her, waiting. "We won't hide," Layla said, voice low but firm. "We investigate. Publicly, no immunity, not even for Charles." A silence fell. Layla Devon said hesitantly, "He was the one who believed in you. He gave you everything precisely." She cut in, her eyes sharp as a blade through fog. "If we avoid the truth out of gratitude, we become exactly like the Whitmores, burying wrongs to protect legacies." The room fell into stunned silence. She continued, I'll hold a press conference tonight, announcing an independent investigation into all questionable land deals. We'll release the results later. They are to the public at exactly 8 p.m. In Whitmore's press hall, Layla stepped onto the podium. No blazer, no power suit, just a plain white shirt and a neat bun. But her presence radiated calm command. To all those with questions, Layla began, I am not here to protect anyone's reputation. I am here to redefine what honor means to a truth, not avoidance. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. We are launching an independent investigation into all past land transactions conducted by Whitmore Holdings. If wrongdoing is found, we will disclose it. If there are victims, we will compensate them. And if there is accountability to bear, we will bear it. A journalist raised a hand. Aren't you afraid this will destroy the image you've worked so hard to build? Layla smiled. If an image only stands by hiding truth, it deserves to fall. Across the city, in a rundown apartment in the West End, Gregory watched the press conference on TV. His hands trembled. He couldn't believe Itha's plan to corner the girl had become her launchpad. She didn't flinch, he muttered. She accepted the past. He hurled a whiskey bottle at the floor. But even the sound of glass shattering couldn't drown out the crushing realization. Bearing down on him, he had become the very thing he once made, a man terrified of the truth. 1 week later, the preliminary investigation results were released. Yes, Charles Whitmore had been involved in the 2004 deal, but new documents revealed he had secretly set up a compensation fund for the displaced family, something never made public. In his final years, he transferred the fund's assets to a non-profit he had quietly founded to support resettlement. The press called it a silent atonement. As for Layla, she made no further comment. She kept working, day by day. When later asked how she remained so calm during the crisis, she answered, because I grew up in a world that expected me to fail. So when failure came, I wasn't afraid. I just kept walking. Monday morning, her office glowed with pale sunlight. Outside the glass, New York's sky was unexpectedly clear after a week of chaos news cycles. Press conferences, debates, and data leaks. Layla sat at her desk, reviewing the second investigative report. The documents confirmed that Charles did not directly authorize the unlawful deal, but also didn't publicly oppose it. A gray area of morality, guilt, but not innocence either. She knew the old version of herself might have been angry, disappointed, even ready to quit. But after everything, she understood. People can still choose to do the right thing even after being wrong. Then the intercom buzzed. There's a woman asking to meet you, Devon said from outside. She says she worked at Whitmore Holdings back in the 90s. Name's Ava Sinclair. Layla looked up. The name rang a distant bell. She agreed immediately. A few minutes later, Ava entered, early 60s, small frame, simple gray sweater, but eyes sharp as glass. What struck Layla wasn't her appearance, it was how she looked at her, not with fear, not awe, but something else, a kind of quiet recognition, like a mother watching a dream come back to life. You don't know how much you remind me of Charles, Ava said without introduction. Not in appearance, but in how you face the truth head on. Layla gestured for her to sit. You worked here. Actually, I was rejected 3 times, Ava chuckled softly. Single black mother, community college degree, didn't meet HR's standards back then. But then, Layla leaned in. Charles called me back. He'd seen me help a co-worker clean up a flood when the office AC burst. No one else lifted a finger. I finished cleaning and left, thinking no one would notice. But he did. Layla nodded. That was exactly the Charles she had come to understand. Flawed, yes, but always watching. Always judging character through small things. He called me to his office. We talked. During that meeting, he let slip a draft policy outlining an internal compensation fund for families displaced by those very deals. Layla's breath caught. The fund we've never been able to trace, Ava nodded. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a weathered envelope, yellowed at the edges. Inside was a handwritten letter. Charles's unmistakable scrawl confirming he had authorized a third party to safeguard off-record files for aiding 68 families displaced in redevelopment projects. I kept it for 30 years, Ava said, because I knew one day someone would need it. And when I saw you in the news, I knew that day had come. Layla took the letter, her hand trembling. In her eyes was more than emotion, it was a profound certainty that history, no matter how distorted, always finds its way back to justice when someone waits long enough. That night, Layla and the board held a second press briefing. No spotlights, no media spectacle, just a modest room and a few seasoned journalists who came to listen, not to sensationalize. Layla stood, letter in hand. I offer you a document absent from any official financial record. A letter Charles Whitmore wrote in 1993, confirming his secret efforts to build a fund to compensate families harmed by past land deals. She paused. Justice is not only about exposing wrongdoing, it's also about revealing what was right but buried. The next day, Ava Sinclair was the guest of honor at an internal roundtable Layla organized. The Forgotten Voices. The room was packed. Dozens of former workers, janitors, security staff, and maintenance crew invited as honored guests, not to serve, but to be seen. Ava stood at the center, her voice steady. They once thought people like us didn't know, didn't remember, but the memories of the overlooked are sharper than any report. Layla stood in the back, eyes misty, not because she was overwhelmed but because she understood. A new corporate culture doesn't begin with slogans. It begins by listening to the voices we once called noise. Elsewhere in the city, Clarissa sat reading the news. She flipped slowly through the printed transcript of Ava's speech. Not a word spoken. That night, she sent her first email to Layla. No flowery language. I would like to attend the field training session in Southside. I won't ask for special treatment. Layla read the email in an elevator with Devon. She said nothing, just stared at the screen for a long time. Devon asked gently, "Do you trust her?" Layla answered, voice light as air. "I don't need to trust. I just need them to begin." Monday, 9 a.m. The conference room on the 12th floor of Whitmore Holdings looked nothing like any space the corporation had ever known. There was no elevated stage for executives, no VIP seats draped in white cloth, no nameplates embossed in golden ink. Instead, a simple circle of chairs sat in the center of the room. No one sat above anyone else, no distance separated power from silence. No distinction was made between those who had once been fired and those who once signed the termination papers. Layla entered last, no ceremony, no applause. She wore a light blue, coarse cotton shirt, no title badge, and carried only an old notebook, one constant she had kept since the beginning of her journey. She nodded to each person in the circle, faces long-deemed second-tier staff, Ms. Marcia, the internal librarian, Mr. Derrick, the security guard reassigned for being too friendly with guests, Ms. Elena, the former accountant dismissed for having a child out of wedlock, and across the circle Clarissa. She sat slightly hunched, but didn't avert Layla's gaze. Her clothes were surprisingly modest, no Rolex, no red lacquered nails. Flat shoes replaced heels, making her seem smaller, more human. "Thank you all for being here," Layla began, her voice low but steady. "Today isn't about rehashing right or wrong. Today is about attempting something we've avoided far too long, listening." No one spoke until Mr. Derrick quietly said, 28 years as a guard, and never once was I invited to sit as an equal in this room. Today, I don't need anything more than this moment to say thank you, Ms. Elena followed. I was once called a PR liability just for having a child alone. If I had stayed silent and signed that termination paper, I wouldn't be here today. Thank you, Layla, for not letting silence become our default. Clarissa sat still, hands clasped. Her eyes shifted faintly. Layla listened. Every word, every breath. She didn't rush to speak. She wanted this to be a hearing, without speeches, without curated statements, just raw truth, spoken and left untouched. Midway through the session, Layla turned to Clarissa. "Would you like to share something?" She asked, not as a challenge, but as an open door. Clarissa looked up. Her eyes were a mix of guardedness and surprise, but then she nodded. "I used to believe that organizations needed control to survive, and control, I thought, meant silence. I wasn't cruel, I just didn't want to lose my place. I thought that maintaining order meant I was doing right." She paused, voice catching, "but I never realized that order was built on the fear of others." Layla didn't speak. She nodded, eyes slightly misted. A wordless agreement, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement, of courage, of beginning to see one's own wrongs. When the dialogue ended, there was no applause, no dramatic closing, yet no one left immediately. Everyone lingered, as if afraid to let go of the fragile feeling just kindled sense of no longer being shadows in a system that never saw them. Clarissa stood, walked slowly toward Layla as the room emptied. No cameras, no audience, no pretense. "Layla," she said, calling her by name alone for the first time. "I didn't think you'd let me sit in that circle." Layla responded without hesitation. "No one deserves to be left outside. If they're trying to step in." Clarissa chuckled softly. "I won't become a good person overnight, but I think I can begin by listening." Layla nodded. "Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is admit we haven't always been kind." That night, Layla returned to her small apartment in Harlem, home she and her mother had shared for years. It remained modest, with just a few new potted plants on the balcony and a framed photo of the two of them by the bedside. Marlon, still recovering, had begun walking again. She sat in her wooden chair by the window, reading the news with a cup of hot ginger tea. "Scared them again with your silence, huh?" she teased, eyes still on the paper. Layla laughed. "I didn't do anything. I just invited them to sit, and that's enough," her mother replied, calm but certain. "Most people spend their whole lives just wanting a place to sit without being pushed out." Layla leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Tomorrow I'm speaking to students in Southside. The school that used to stand on the land they took, now we're helping rebuild it." Marlene placed a hand on her daughter's head. "You're not here to save the world, Layla. But if you can do even a small part, to make people feel less ashamed of who they are, that's already something big." Layla nodded, her heart no longer burdened by anger at the past or crushed by expectations of the future. Only one quiet vow remained. If the forgotten can be invited into the circle, then there will be no room left for unearned privilege to sit above. Less than 2 weeks after the circle dialogue at Whitmore Holdings, a ripple effect spread through the media and social platforms. A video clip of Layla listening intently to Mr. Derek's emotional words had been viewed over 12 million times in 3 days, becoming a focal point for talk shows, podcasts, and educational forums. One newspaper described her as not a power holder but a restorer of the right to be heard. The hashtag #TheCircleRoom went viral, symbolizing the first non-hierarchical dialogue model in U.S. corporate history. Yet, as media praise soared, so did voices of doubt, this time not from the Whitmore family, but from higher towers, international investors. A piece in Global Capital Watch posed a piercing question. Is morality a long-term growth strategy or just a fleeting emotional trend? Some investors from Asia and the Middle East expressed concern that Whitmore's new profit-sharing and internal dialogue model could reduce dividend yield over the next 5 years. They demanded a direct meeting with the lead shareholder. Everyone knew they meant Layla. The meeting was held at the opulent Grand Plaza Manhattan Hotel. Layla walked into a room of dark suits, warm lighting, and dozens of recording devices. She sat down, composed, no heavy makeup, brown fabric notebook in hand, no PowerPoint, no charts, nothing but her presence. A middle-aged man, representing a Singaporean investment fund, opened the floor. "We respect your moral drive, but markets don't run on compassion. They run on data, profits, growth." Layla nodded. "I won't deny that," she said, "and I won't pretend profit isn't important. But I believe this. A company that treats people well will last longer than one that treats them like graphs, another representative challenged. But morality isn't measurable. And the people at the bottom, they don't buy shares. Layla smiled, not in sarcasm, but in a kind of weary understanding. No, they don't, she said. But they give their time, their labor, their loyalty, and their silence for years. They are the foundation. And if that cracks, no matter how high the tower goes, it falls. The meeting lasted 3 hours. No investors pulled out, but no applause followed either. Layla exited into the waning sunlight. Dozens of cameras waited. She gave no statement, just a slight bow of her head before walking away. Beside her, Devin whispered, "Are you afraid they'll walk away?" Layla kept her gaze forward. Her voice was steady. "No, I'm only afraid that one day I might walk away from the things I once believed in." Back at her office, Layla received a package from PR. Inside, glossy files labeled, "New Brand Campaign. Layla Thompson, the face of the future." It outlined changes to her wardrobe, speech training, expert platform creation, even suggestions on how often to smile for media lickability. At the bottom, handwritten note from a PR consultant, "Keep the spirit of Layla, just make it manageable." Layla flipped through the pages, then quietly set them aside. No anger, no protest. Just opened her notebook and wrote, "Values aren't retouched in pixels. They're revealed in how we treat people when no one is watching." That evening, in the Whitmore lobby, the tech team unveiled a new digital screen. Once used for real-time stock prices, symbol of endless profit, making it now displayed only 3 metrics: employee satisfaction, updated quarterly, client retention rate annually, internal equity index. From anonymous feedback at the bottom, a small but glowing line read, "Not everyone needs to see to believe, but everyone deserves to be seen." Meanwhile, in a Brooklyn TV studio, Gregory Whitmore, after 2 months of absence, appeared for a live-stream interview. Dressed plainly, noticeably thinner, eyes sunken, but no longer bitter, the host asked, "Do you regret it?" Gregory paused, then nodded. "Yes, but not just because I lost the company. I regret that I never looked at anyone without secretly thinking they were beneath me. And now," Gregory looked straight into the camera, "now I'm learning how to enter a room without needing the highest seat." After the broadcast, Layla received the video via email. She watched it alone, in the dark. When Gregory spoke his final line, she said nothing, but in her eyes, something settled. A door once heavy closing gently, drifting away like the season's last breeze. The next day, Layla returned to Southside, where the new housing project had just reopened for residents. She sat in the middle of the old school gardens raised for a commercial project, now rebuilt as a community skills center, where children learned finance, technology, law, and empathy. A boy approached, about 10 years old. "Are you Layla Thompson?" he asked. "I am." She smiled. "Are you the one who gave us this school back?" Layla nodded. "I just helped open the doors again. You're the ones bringing it back to life." He thought for a moment, then asked, "So what do you do?" Layla replied softly, "I do the kind of work that helps people be seen." October 1st, 9 a.m. The building that once bore the name Whitmore Holdings was no longer called that. The polished brass plaque at the front is engraved with Charles Whitmore, a legacy corporation of America, had been replaced with a new inscription, unembellished and clear, Institute for Equity and Future Enterprises. There was no red carpet, no champagne, no drawn-out speeches, just a plain wooden podium set at the center of the lobby, surrounded by those once excluded. From power no standing as living witnesses to its reformation, Layla stepped onto the podium. Autumn wind rustled through the trees behind her, carrying the soft whisper of change. She wore an earth-toned long-sleeved blouse, rough cotton trousers, and carried no title placard. She was no longer the heir, the teenage CEO, or the reform icon the media had once branded her. Today, Layla was simply a pathmaker, and it was time to step aside so that others could continue the walk. Less than a year ago, she began, "I walked into a room where no one believed I had a right to sit. And today, I stand here not because I'm more than anyone else, but because I was once seen as less than everyone else." She paused, scanning the crowd. Among them sat Clarissa, silent in the front row, hands gently clasped. Gregory, in a plain white shirt, was also present, now enrolled in the reintegration program, and seemingly learning when to stay silent. There were former staffers who had never once been invited to a board meeting, no policy advisors. And there were dozens of young facestidants from South Side, once labeled urban disruption, now standing as future representatives. Layla continued, "We cannot change the past, but we can change who gets to tell it. We cannot retrieve what was lost, but we can redistribute what was never fairly shared. I don't want to be a CEO. I don't want to sit forever at the top of a pyramid, because justice doesn't live at the top. It lives where everyone feels seen and needed." She raised her hand. Behind her, a large screen flickered to life, displaying the 3 pillars of the newly formed institute. 1. Community as core, no longer customers serving companies, but companies serving communities. 2. Transparency as metric, all financial, personnel, and social decisions are public. 3. Voices power, every member, from lowest to highest, has the right to petition, respond, and vote on policy via digital ballot. Layla ended with one line, short, but powerful enough to still the room. Power is not meant to be held. It is meant to be shared. When she stepped down, no applause came immediately. There was a beat of silence in it, of hesitation, but of emotional restraint searching for release. Then, as if by shared instinct, the entire hall rose to their feet. Not a thunderous ovation, but a steady rhythm of claps, slow, deliberate, like heartbeats resounded in rare unity. They weren't cheering for a star. They were clapping for themselves, as for finally seeing their place in the rebuilding. That evening, in her small apartment in Harlem, Layla turned to the final page of her weathered notebook and wrote, "Justice doesn't come from demanding change. It comes when we know we must step out of the center so someone else can step in. And even if I no longer sit at the center, I will always keep the door open." 3 months later, Layla quietly began her college studies at a liberal arts school on the West Coast. Not as a public figure, but simply as a student. She declined book deals, turned down TED Talks. She accepted only one invitation to speak at a local high school, where she had once volunteered during a summer program. During the talk, a young brown-skinned girl stood and asked, "Ms. Layla, if Mr. Charles hadn't believed in you, do you think any of this would have happened?" Layla smiled. She stepped off the stage, walked over to the girl, and looked her in the eye. "Maybe not. Maybe it would have taken longer. But one thing I know for sure, there will always be someone who believes in you, as long as you don't stop believing in yourself." At the far end of the schoolyard, a small bronze plaque had been installed. It read, "For those once denied a seat, but who still stood for others." Layla Thompson's story didn't end with a crown. There were no oversized checks, no walls filled with awards. It ended with an open door, very one she once had to bruise her fists knocking on, now left wide for those behind her. And because of that, her story never really ended.